preceding generations have presented us in a highly developed science and mechanical knowledge, with a most valuable gift which carries with it possibilities of making our life free and beautiful, such as no previous generation has enjoyed. But this gift also brings with it dangers to our existence as great as any that have ever threatened it. The destiny of civilized humanity depends more than ever on the moral forces it is capable of generating. Hence, the task that confronts our age is certainly no easier than the tasks our immediate predecessors successfully performed. The foodstuffs and other goods which the world needs can be produced in far fewer hours of work than formerly. But this has made the problem of the division of labor and the distribution of the goods produced far more difficult. We all feel that the free play of economic forces, the unregulated and unrestrained pursuit of wealth and power by the individual, no longer leads automatically to a tolerable solution of these problems. Production, labor, and distribution need to be organized on a definite plan in order to prevent valuable productive energies from being thrown away and sections of the population from becoming impoverished and relapsing into savagery. If unrestricted sacro egoismo leads to disastrous consequences in economic life, it is a still worse guide to international relations. The development of mechanical methods of warfare is such that human life will become intolerable if people do not before long discover a way of preventing war. The importance of this object is only equaled by the inadequacy of the attempts hitherto made to attain it. People seek to minimize the danger by limitation of armaments and restrictive rules for the conduct of war, but war is not like a parlor game in which the players loyally stick to the rules. Where life and death are at stake, rules and obligations go by the board. Only the absolute repudiation of all war is of any use here. The creation of an international court of arbitration is not enough. There must be treaties guaranteeing that the decisions of this court shall be made effective by all the nations acting in concert. Without such a guarantee, the nations will never have the courage to disarm seriously. Suppose, for example, that the American, English, German, and French governments insisted on the Japanese governments putting an immediate stop to their warlike operations in China. Under pain of a complete economic boycott, do you suppose that any Japanese government would be found ready to take the responsibility of plunging its country into a perilous adventure? Then why is it not done? Why must every individual and every nation tremble for their existence? Because each seeks his own wretched momentary advantage and refuses to subordinate it to the welfare and prosperity of the community. That is why I began by telling you that the fate of the human race was more than ever dependent on its moral strength today. The way to a joyful and happy state is through renunciation and self-limitation everywhere. Where can the strength for such a process come from? Only from those who had the chance in their early years to fortify their minds and broaden their outlook through study. Thus, we of the older generation look to you and hope that you will strive with all your might to achieve what was denied to us. Tonight we're going to be reading a collection of letters and essays written by Albert Einstein. The collection is titled The World as I See It, published by Kensington or Citadel Press, I should say. I just thought that was a good jumping off point, Danny DeVito would say. You know? So let's go to the beginning then. The meaning of life. What is the meaning of human life, or of organic life altogether? To answer this question at all implies a religion. Is there any sense, then, you ask, in putting it? I answer, the man who regards his own life and that of his fellow creatures as meaningless is not merely unfortunate, but almost disqualified for life. The world as I see it. What an extraordinary situation is that of us mortals. Each of us is here for a brief sojourn, for what purpose he knows not, though he sometimes thinks he feels it. But from the point of view of daily life, without going deeper, we exist for our fellow men. In the first place, for those on whose smiles and welfare all our happiness depends. And next, for all those unknown to us personally, with whose destinies we are bound up by the tie of sympathy. 100 times every day I remind myself that my inner and outer life depend on the labors of other men, living and dead, and that I must exert myself in order to give in the same measure as I have received and am still receiving. I am strongly drawn to the simple life, and am often oppressed by the feeling that I am engrossing an unnecessary amount of the labor of my fellow men. I regard class differences as contrary to justice, and in the last resort based on force. I also consider that plain living is good for everybody physically and mentally. In human freedom in the philosophical sense, I am definitely a disbeliever. Everybody acts not only under external compulsion, but also in accordance with inner necessity. Schopenhauer's saying that a man can do as he will, but not will as he will, has been an inspiration to me since my youth up, and a continued consolation, an unfailing wellspring of patience in the face of the hardships of life, my own and others. The feeling mercifully mitigates the sense of responsibility which so easily becomes paralyzing, and it prevents us from taking ourselves and other people too seriously. It conduces to a view of life in which humor, above all, has its place. To inquire after the meaning or object of one's own existence or of creation generally has always seemed to me absurd from an objective point of view. And yet everybody has certain ideals which determine the direction of his endeavors and his judgments. In this sense, I have never looked upon ease and happiness as ends in themselves, such as ethical basis. I call more proper for a herd of swine the ideals which have lighted me on my way, and time after time give me new courage to face life cheerfully, have been truth, goodness, and beauty. Without the sense of fellowship with men of like mind, of preoccupation with the objective, the eternally unattainable in the field of art and scientific research, life would have seemed to me empty. The ordinary objects of human endeavor, property, outward success, luxury, have always seemed to me contemptible. My passionate sense of social justice and social responsibility has always contrasted oddly with my pronounced freedom from the need for direct contact with other human beings and human communities. I gang my own gait and have never belonged to my country, my home, my friends, or even my immediate family with my whole heart. In the face of all these ties, I've never lost an obstinate sense of detachment, of the need for solitude, a feeling in which increases with the years. One is sharply conscious, yet without regret of the limits to the possibility of mutual understanding and sympathy with one's fellow creatures. Such a person, no doubt, loses something in the way of geniality and lightheartedness. Such a person, no doubt, loses something in the way of geniality and lightheartedness. On the other hand, he is largely independent of the opinions, habits, and judgments of his fellows and avoids the temptation to take his stand on such insecure foundations. All right. That was gnarly. My political ideal is that of democracy. Let every man be respected as an individual and no man idolized. It is an irony of fate that I myself have been the recipient of It is an irony of fate that I myself have been the recipient of excessive admiration and respect from my fellows through no fault and no merit of my own. The cause of this may well be the desire, unattainable for many, to understand the one or two ideas to which I have with my feeble powers attained through ceaseless struggle. I am quite aware that it is I am quite aware that it is necessary for the success of any complex undertaking that one man should do the thinking and directing, and in general bear the responsibility. But the led must not be compelled. They must be able to choose their leader. An autocratic system of coercion, in my opinion, soon degenerates. For force always attracts men of low morality, and I believe it to be an invariable ride. And I believe it to be an invariable rule that tyrants of genius are succeeded by scoundrels. For this reason, I have always been passionately opposed to systems such as we see in Italy and Russia today. The thing that has brought discredit upon the prevailing form of democracy in Europe today is not to be laid to the door of the democratic idea as such, but to lack of stability on the part of the heads of governments and to the impersonal character of the electoral system. I believe in this respect, the United States of America have found the right way. They have a responsible president who was elected for a sufficiently long period and has sufficient powers to be really responsible. On the other hand, what I value in our political system is the more extensive provision that it makes for this individual in case of illness or need. The really valuable thing in the pageant of human life seems to me not the state, but the creative, sentient individual, the personality. It alone creates the noble and the sublime, while the herd as such remains dull in thought and dull in feeling. This topic brings me to the worst outcrop of the herd nature, the military system, which I abhor. That a man can take pleasure in marching in formation to the strains of a band is enough to make me despise him. He has only been given his big brain by mistake. A backbone was all he needed. This plague spot of civilization ought to be abolished with all possible speed. Heroism by order, senseless violence, and all the pestilent nonsense that goes by the name of patriotism. How I hate them. War seems to me a mean, contemptible thing. I would rather be hacked in pieces than take part in such an abominable business. And yet, so high, in spite of everything, is my opinion of the human race, that I believe this bogey would have disappeared long ago, had the sound sense of the nations not been systematically corrupted by commercial and political interests acting through the schools and the press. The fairest thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the fundamental emotion which stands at the cradle of true art and true science. He who knows it not and can no longer wonder, no longer feel amazement, is as good as dead, a snuffed out candle. It was the experience of mystery, even if mixed with fear, that endangered religion. A knowledge of the existence of something we cannot penetrate, of the manifestations of the profoundest reason and the most radiant beauty, which are only accessible to our reason in their most elementary forms. It is this knowledge and this emotion that constitute the truly religious attitude. In this sense and in this alone, I am deeply religious man. In this sense and in this alone, I am deeply religious man. I cannot conceive of a God who rewards and punishes his creatures, or has a will of the type of which we are conscious in ourselves. An individual who should survive his physical death is also beyond my comprehension, nor do I wish it otherwise. Such notions are for the fears or absurd egoism of feeble souls. Enough for me the mystery of the eternity of life and the making of the marvelous structure of reality, together with the single-hearted endeavor to comprehend a portion, be it never so tiny, of the reason that manifests itself in nature. So I got this book a while ago, and I don't know. It's just I gotta stop saying I don't know, but I keep saying it because I don't. But man, yeah, just a lot of these things just really like set me off when I was like really young, like just on like good way to think about things, you know, good and evil. It is right in principle that those should be the best loved who have contributed most to the elevation of the human race and human life. But if one goes on to ask who they are, one finds oneself in no inconsiderable difficulties. In the case of political, and even of religious, leaders, it is often very doubtful whether they have done more good or harm. Hence, I most seriously believe that one does people the best service by giving them some elevating work to do, and thus indirectly elevating them. This applies most of all to the great artist, but also in a lesser degree to the scientist. To be sure, it is not the fruits of scientific research that elevate a man and enrich his nature, but the urge to understand, the intellectual work, creative or receptive. It would surely be absurd to judge the value of the Talmud, for instance, by its intellectual fruits. The true value of a human being is determined primarily by the measure and the sense in which he has attained to liberation from the self. Man, oh no, Albert's talking his stuff. That's nice. Oh, that is so nice. That is just a big, yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Society and personality. When we survey our lives and endeavors, we soon observe that almost the whole of our actions and desires are bound up with the existence of other human beings. We see that our whole nature resembles that of the social animals. We eat food that others have grown, wear clothes that others have made, live in houses that others have built. The greater part of our knowledge and beliefs has been communicated to us by other people through the medium of a language with which others have created. Without language, our mental capacities would be poor indeed. Comparable to those of the higher animals, we have, therefore, to admit that we owe our principal advantage over the beasts to the fact of living in human society. The individual, if left alone from birth, would remain primitive and beast-like in his thoughts and feelings, to a degree that we can hardly conceive. The individual is what he is, and has the significance that he has, not so much in virtue of his individuality, but rather as a member of a great human society, which directs his material and spiritual existence from the cradle to the grave. A man's value. That there's a movie called Cradle to the Grave. I think it's like Spike Lee and DMX or something. It's a cool movie though. It's just like my aunt showed it to me a while ago. But that's a cool movie. A man's value to the community depends primarily on how far his feelings, thoughts, and actions are directed towards promoting the good of his fellows. We call him good or bad according to how he stands in this matter. It looks at first sight as if our estimate of a man depended entirely on his social qualities, and yet such an attitude would be wrong. It is clear that all the valuable things, material, spiritual, and moral, which we receive from society can be traced back through countless generations to certain creative individuals. The use of fire, the cultivation of edible plants, the steam engine, each was discovered by one man. Only the individual can think, and thereby create new values for society, nay, even set up new moral standards to which the life of the community conforms. Without creative, independently thinking and judging personalities, the upward development of society is as unthinkable as the development of the individual personality without the nourishing soil of the community. The health of society thus depends quite as much on the independence of the individuals composing it as on their close political cohesion. It has been said very justly that Greco-Europeo-American culture as a whole, and in particular its brilliant flowering in the Italian Renaissance, which put an end to the stagnation of medieval Europe, is based on the liberation and comparative isolation of the individual. Let us now consider the times in which we live. How does society fare? How the individual? The population of the civilized countries is extremely dense as compared with former times. Europe today contains about 3 times as many people as it did 100 years ago, but the number of great men has decreased out of all proportion. Only a few individuals are known to the masses as personalities, through their creative achievements. Organization has to some extent taken the place of the great man, particularly in the technical sphere, but also to a very perceptible extent in the scientific. The lack of outstanding figures is particularly striking in the domain of art. Painting and music have definitely degenerated and largely lost their popular appeal. In politics, not only are leaders lacking, but the independence of spirit and the sense of justice of the citizen have to a great extent declined. The democratic parliamentarian regime, which is based on such independence, has in many places been shaken. Dictatorships have sprung up and are tolerated because men's sense of the dignity and the rights of the individual is no longer strong enough. In 2 weeks, the sheep-like masses can be worked up by the news. Papers In 2 weeks, the sheep-like masses can be worked up by the newspapers into such a state of excited fury that the men are prepared to put on uniform and kill and be killed for the sake of the worthless aims of a few interested parties. Compulsory military service seems to me the most disgraceful symptom of the debt. Compulsory military service seems to me the most disgraceful symptom of that deficiency in personal dignity from which civilized mankind is suffering today. No wonder there is no lack of prophets who prophesy the early eclipse of our civilization. I am not one of these pessimists. I believe that better times are coming. Let me shortly state my reasons for such confidence. In my opinion, the present symptoms of decadence are explained by the fact that the development of industry and machinery has made the struggle for existence very much more severe, greatly to the detriment of the free development of the individual. But the development of machinery means that less and less work is needed from the individual for the satisfaction of the community's needs. A planned division of labor is becoming more and more of a crying necessity, and this division will lead to the material security of the individual. This security and the spare time and energy which the individual will have at his command can be made to further his development. In this way, the community may regain its health, and we will hope that future historians will explain the morbid symptoms of present-day society as the childhood ailments of an aspiring humanity, due entirely to the excessive speed at which civilization was advancing. Oh my God. Oh my God. Of wealth. I am absolutely convinced that no wealth in the world can help humanity forward, even in the hands of the most devoted worker in this cause. The example of great and pure characters is the only thing that can produce fine ideas and noble deeds. Money only appeals to selfishness and always tempts its owners irresistibly to abuse it. Can anyone imagine Moses, Jesus, or Gandhi armed with the money bags of Carnegie? Teachers and pupils, an address to children. The principal art of the teacher is to awaken the joy in creation and knowledge. My dear children, I rejoice to see you before me today, happy youth of a sunny and fortunate land. Bear in mind that the wonderful things you learn in your schools are the work of many generations, produced by enthusiastic effort and infinite labor in every country of the world. All this is put into your hands as your inheritance in order that you may receive it, honor it, add to it, and one day faithfully hand it on to your children. Thus do we mortals achieve immortality in the permanent things which we create in common. If you always keep that in mind, you will find a meaning in life and work and acquire the right attitude towards other nations and ages. Paradise Lost. As late as the 17th century, the savants and artists of all Europe were so closely united by the bond of a continuous ideal that cooperation between them was scarcely affected by political events. This unity was further strengthened by the general use of the Latin language. Today we look back at the state of affairs as at a lost paradise. The passions of nationalism have destroyed this community of the intellect and the Latin language, which once united the whole world, is dead. The men of learning have become the chief mouthpieces of national tradition and lost their sense of an intellectual commonwealth. Nowadays, we are faced with the curious fact that the politicians, the practical men of affairs, have become the exponents of international ideas. It is they who have created the League of Nations. Religion and science. Everything that the human race has done and thought is concerned with the satisfaction of felt needs and the assuagement of pain. One has to keep this constantly in mind if one wishes to understand spiritual movements and their development. Feeling and desire are the motive forces behind all human endeavor and human creation. And however exalted a guise the latter may present itself to us, now what are the feelings and needs that have led men to religious thought and belief in the widest sense of the words? A little consideration will suffice to show us that the most varying emotions preside over the birth of religious thought and experience. With primitive man, it is above all fear that evokes religious notions: fear of hunger, wild beasts, sickness, death. Since at this stage of existence, understanding of causal connections is usually poorly developed, the human mind creates for itself more or less analogous beings on whose wills and actions these fearful happenings depend. One's object now is to secure the favor of these beings by carrying out actions and offering sacrifices which, according to the tradition handed down from generation to generation, propitiate them or make them well disposed towards a mortal. I am speaking now of the religion of fear. This, though not created, is in an important degree stabilized by the formation of a special priestly caste which sets up a mediator between the people and the beings they fear, and erects a hegemony on this basis. In many cases, the leader or ruler whose position depends on other factors, or a privileged class, combines priestly functions with its secular authority in order to make the latter more secure. Or the political rulers and the priestly caste make common cause in their own interests. The social feelings are another source of the crystallization of religion. Fathers and mothers and the leaders of larger human communities are mortal and fallible. The desire for guidance, love, and support prompts men to form the social or moral conception of God. This is the God of providence who protects, disposes, rewards, and punishes. The God who, according to the width of believers' outlook, loves and cherishes the life of the tribe or of the human race, or even life as such, the comforter in sorrow and unsatisfied longing, who preserves the souls of the dead. This is the social or moral conception of God. The Jewish scriptures admirably illustrate the development from the religion of fear to moral religion, which is continued in the New Testament. The religions of all civilized people, especially the peoples of the Orient, are primarily moral religions. The development from a religion of fear to moral religion is a great step in a nation's life. That primitive religions are based entirely on fear and the religions of civilized peoples purely on morality is a prejudice against which we must be on our guard. The truth is that they are all intermediate types, with this reservation that on the higher levels of social life the religion of morality predominates. Common to all these types is the anthropomorphic character of the conception of God, of their conception of God. Only individuals of exceptional endowments and exceptionally high minded communities, as a general rule, get in any real sense beyond this level. But there is a third state of religious experience that belongs to all of them, even though it is rarely found in a pure form, and which I will call cosmic religious feeling. It is very difficult to explain this feeling to anyone who is entirely without it, especially as there is no anthropomorphic conception of God corresponding to it. The individual feels the nothingness of human desires and aims and the sublimity and marvelous order which reveal themselves both in nature and in the world of thought. He looks upon individual existence as a sort of prison and wants to experience the universe as a single, significant whole. The beginnings of cosmic religious feeling already appear in earlier stages of development, example being in many of the Psalms of David and in some of the prophets. Buddhism, as we've learned from the wonderful writings of Schopenhauer, especially, contains a much stronger element of it. The religious geniuses of all ages have been distinguished by this kind of religious feeling, which knows no dogma and no God conceived in man's image, so that there can be no church whose central teachings are based on it. Hence, it is precisely among the heretics of every age that we find men who were filled with the highest kind of religious feeling and were in many cases regarded by their contemporaries as atheists, some also as saints. Looked at in this light, men like Democritus, Francis of Assisi, and Spinoza are closely akin to one another. How can cosmic religious feeling be communicated from one person to another if it can give rise to no definite notion of a God and no theology? In my view, it is the most important function of art and science to awaken this feeling and keep it alive in those who are capable of it. We thus arrive at a conception of the relation of science to religion very different from the usual one. When one views the matter historically, one is inclined to look upon science and religion as irreconcilable antagonists, and for a very obvious reason. The man who is thoroughly convinced of the universal operation of the law of causation cannot for a moment entertain the idea of a being who interferes in the course of events. That is, if he takes the hypothesis of causality really seriously. He has no use for the religion of fear and equally little for social or moral religion. A God who rewards and punishes is inconceivable to him for the simple reason that a man's actions are determined by necessity, external and internal, so that in God's eyes he cannot be responsible, any more than an inanimate object is responsible for the motions it goes through. Hence, science has been charged with undermining morality, but the charge is unjust. A man's ethical behavior should be based effectually on sympathy, education, and social ties. No religious basis is necessary. Man would indeed be in a poor way if he had to be restrained by fear and punishment and hope of reward after death. It is therefore easy to see why churches have always fought science and persecuted its devotees. On the other hand, I maintain that cosmic religious feeling is the strongest and noblest incitement to scientific research. Only those who realize the immense efforts and, above all, the devotion which pioneer work in theoretical science demands can grasp the strength of the emotion out of which alone such work, remote as it is from the immediate realities of life, can issue. What a deep conviction of the rationality of the universe, and what a yearning to understand, were it but a feeble reflection of the mind revealed in this world. Kepler and Newton must have had to enable them to spend years of solitary labor in disentangling the principles of celestial mechanics. Those whose acquaintance with scientific research is derived chiefly from its practical results easily develop a completely false notion of the mentality of the men who, surrounded by a skeptical world, have shown the way to those like-minded with themselves, scattered through the earth and the centuries. Only one who has devoted his life to similar ends can have a vivid realization of what has inspired those men and given them the strength to remain true to their purpose in spite of countless failures. It is cosmic religious feeling that gives a man strength of this sort. A contemporary has said, not unjustly, that in this materialistic age of ours, the serious scientific workers are the only profoundly religious people. The religiousness of science. You will hardly find one among the profoundest sort of scientific minds without a peculiar religious feeling of his own, but is different from the religion of the naive man. For the latter, God is a being from whose one's for the latter, God is a being from whose one oh my God. From the latter, God is a being from whose care one hopes to benefit and whose punishment one fears, a sublimation, a sublimation of a feeling similar to that of a child for its father, a being to whom one stands to some extent in a personal relation, however deeply it may be tinged with awe. But the scientist is possessed by the sense of universal causation. The future to him is every whit as necessary and determined as the past. There is nothing divine about morality. It is a purely human affair. His religious feeling takes the form of a rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that, compared with it, all the systematic thinking and among and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. This feeling is the guiding principle of his life and work, and so far as he succeeds in keeping himself from the shackles of selfish desire, it is beyond question closely akin to that which has possessed the religious geniuses of all ages. Just gonna keep going. Yeah, it's just everything in this is just so nice. Everything I've been reading lately has just been beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I don't know. I was talking to this pretty girl about this, like books and things, and I don't know. Yeah, it's just like I forget that she was just saying like she was reading like fiction and things, and I forget there's fiction books. I just read things that like just I don't know, not fiction. I think it's funny that there's text written on pages that is trying to explain what's occurring out here, and it's just I'm addicted to reading these types of books. Like I do like sprinkle in fiction because it is like good, I think, to I just like other forms of media for like that type of like I like movies and things. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's just like I think I need to kind of open my mind to more fiction books. But it is just interesting. These books, they just I don't know. They do something and to you. I think it was kind of what he's talking about with the cosmic religion. I don't know, but that it's just yeah, damn, I don't even know what song it was anymore, but Blades of Glory, Will Ferrell, it's like, that, no one knows what it means. It just gets the people going. Like, yes, yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. All right, so peace, right? Peace. The importance of securing international peace was recognized by the really great men of former generations. But the technical advances of our times have turned this ethical postulate into a matter of life and death for civilized mankind today, and made the taking of an active part in the solution of the problem of peace a moral duty which no conscientious man can shirk. One has to realize that the powerful industrial groups concerned in the manufacture of arms are doing their best in all countries to prevent the peaceful settlement of international disputes, and that rulers can achieve this great end only if they are sure of the vigorous support of the majority of their peoples. In these days of democratic government, the fate of the nations hangs on themselves. Each individual must always bear that in mind. It's bad, but I wish I smoked cigarettes still. Like, I don't know what it is, but I just hate ripping a damn electric thing. I don't like it right now. I don't like. I much rather be just ripping cigs inside. It's just, yeah, probably frowned upon. This is just not it at all in any way of the sort. The pacifist problem. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very glad of this opportunity of saying a few words to you about the problem of pacifism. The course of events in the last few years has once more shown us how little we are justified in leaving the struggle against armaments and against the war spirit to the governments. On the other hand, the formation of large organizations with a large membership can of itself bring us very little nearer to our goal. In my opinion, the best method is, in this case, the violent one of conscientious objection with the aid of organizations for giving moral and material support to the courageous conscientious objectors in each country. In this way, we may succeed in making the problem of pacifism an acute one, a real struggle which attracts forceful natures. It is an illegal struggle, but a struggle for people's real rights against their governments in so far as the latter demand criminal acts of the citizen. Many who think themselves good pacifists will jib at this out and out pacifism on patriotic grounds. Such people are not to be relied on in the hour of crisis, as the World War amply proved. I am most grateful to you for according me an opportunity to give you my views in person. Now I'm going to read the address to the students' disarmament meeting. This is what I started it with, but I'm saying it. Preceding generations have presented us in a highly developed science and mechanical knowledge, with a most valuable gift which carries with it possibilities of making our life free and beautiful such as no previous generation has enjoyed. But this gift also brings with it dangers to our existence as great as any that have ever threatened it. The destiny of civilized humanity depends more than ever on the moral forces it is capable of generating. Hence, the task that confronts our age is certainly no easier than the tasks our immediate predecessors successfully performed. The foodstuffs and other goods which the world needs can be produced in far fewer hours of work than formerly, but this has made the problem of the division of labor and the distribution of the goods produced far more difficult. We all feel that the free play of economic forces, the unregulated and unrestrained pursuit of wealth and power by the individual, no longer leads automatically to a tolerable solution of these problems. Production, labor, and distribution need to be organized on a definite plan in order to prevent the valuable productive energies from being thrown away and sections of the population from becoming impoverished and relapsing into savagery. If unrestricted, sacro-egoismo leads to disastrous consequences in economic life. It is a still worse guide in international relations. The development of mechanical methods of warfare is such that human life will become intolerable if people do not before long discover a way of preventing war. The importance of this object is only equaled by the inadequacy of the attempts hitherto made to attain it. People seek to minimize the danger by limitation of armaments and restrictive rules for the conduct of war, but war is not like a parlor game in which the players loyally stick to the rules. Where life and death are at stake, rules and obligations go by the board. Only the absolute repudiation of all war is of any use here. The creation of an international court of arbitration is not enough. There must be treaties guaranteeing that the decisions of this court shall be made effective by all the nations acting in concert. Without such a guarantee, the nations will never have the courage to disarm seriously. Suppose, for example, that the American, English, German, and French governments insisted on the Japanese governments putting an immediate stop to their warlike operations in China. Under pain of a complete economic boycott, do you suppose that any Japanese government would be found ready to take the responsibility of plunging its country into such a perilous adventure? Then why is it not done? Why must every individual and every nation tremble for their existence? Because each seeks his own wretched momentary advantage and refuses to subordinate it to the welfare and prosperity of the community. That is why I began by telling you that the fate of the human race was more than ever dependent on its moral strength today. The way to a joyful and happy state is through renunciation and self-limitation everywhere. Where can the strength for such a process come from? Only from those who have had the chances in their early years to fortify their minds and broaden their outlook through study. Thus, we of the older generation look to you and hope that you will strive with all your might to achieve what was denied to us. This next one is a letter to Sigmund Freud. Dear Professor Freud, it is admirable the way the longing to perceive the truth has overcome every other desire in you. You have shown with irresistible clearness how inseparably the combative and destructive instincts are bound up with the amative and vital ones in the human psyche. At the same time, a deep yearning for that great consummation, the internal and external liberation of mankind from war, shines out from the ruthless logic of your expositions. This has been the declared aim of all those who have been honored as moral and spiritual leaders beyond the limits of their own time and country without exception, from Jesus Christ to Goethe and Kant. Is it not significant that such men have been universally accepted as leaders, in spite of the fact that their efforts to mold the course of human affairs were attended with but small success? I am convinced that the great men, those whose achievements, even though in a restricted sphere, set them above their fellows, are animated to an overwhelming extent by the same ideals, but they have little influence on the course of political events. It almost looks as if this domain, on which the fate of nations depends, had inevitably to be given over to violence and irresponsibility. Political leaders or governments owe their position partly to force and partly to popular election. They cannot be regarded as representative of the best elements, morally and intellectually, in their respective nations. The intellectual elite have no direct influence on the history of nations in these days. Their lack of cohesion prevents them from taking a direct part in the solution of contemporary problems. Don't you think that a change might be brought about in this respect by a free association of people whose work and achievements up to date constitute a guarantee of their ability and purity of aim? This international association, whose members would need to keep in touch with each other by a constant interchange of opinions, might, by defining its attitude in the press, responsibility always resting with the signatories on any given occasion, acquire a considerable and salutary moral influence over the settlement of political questions. Such an association would, of course, be a prey to all the ills which so often lead to degenerations in learned societies, dangers which are inseparably bound up with the imperfection of human nature. But should not an effort in this direction be risked in spite of this? I look upon the attempt as nothing less than an imperative duty. If an intellectual association of standing, such as I have described, could be formed, it would no doubt have to try to mobilize the religious organizations for the fight against war. It would give countenance to many whose good intentions are paralyzed today by a melancholy resignation. Finally, I believe that an association formed of persons such as I have described, each highly esteemed in his own line, would be just the thing to give valuable moral support to those elements in the League of Nations which are really working for the great object for which that institution exists. I had rather put these proposals to you than to anyone else in the world, because you are the least of all men the dupe of your desires, and because your critical judgment is supported by a most earnest sense of responsibility. The Institute for Intellectual Cooperation. During this year, the leading politicians of Europe have for the first time drawn the logical conclusion from the truth that a portion of the globe can only regain its prosperity if the underground struggle between the traditional political units ceases. The political organizations of Europe must be strengthened, and a gradual attempt made to abolish tariff barriers. This great end cannot be achieved by treaties alone. People's minds must, above all, be prepared for it. We must try gradually to awaken in them a sense of solidarity which does not, as hitherto, stop at frontiers. It is with this in mind that the League of Nations has created the Commission de Coopération Intellectuelle. This commission is to be an absolutely international and entirely non-political authority, whose business it is to put the intellectuals of all the nations who were isolated by the war into touch with each other. It is a difficult task, for it has, alas, to be admitted that, at least in the countries with which I am most closely acquainted, the artists and men of learning are governed by narrowly nationalist feelings to a far greater extent than the men of affairs. Hitherto, this commission has met twice a year to make its efforts more effective. The French government has decided to create and maintain a permanent institute for intellectual cooperation, which is just now to be opened. It is a generous act on the part of the French nation and deserves the thanks of all. It is an easy and grateful task to rejoice and praise and say nothing about the things one regrets or disapproves of. But honesty alone can help our work forward, so I will not shrink from combining criticism with this greeting to the newborn child. I have daily occasion for observing that the greatest obstacle which the work of our Commission has to encounter is the lack of confidence in its political impartiality. Everything must be done to strengthen that confidence, and everything avoided that might harm it. When, therefore, the French government sets up and maintains an institute out of public funds in Paris as a permanent organ of the Commission, with a Frenchman as its director, the outside observer can hardly avoid the impression that French influence predominates in the Commission. This impression is further strengthened by the fact that so far a Frenchman has also been chairman of the Commission itself. Although the individuals in question are men of the highest reputation, liked and respected everywhere, nevertheless the impression remains. What is this? Dixie a salvavi animam meme. I hope with all my heart that the new institute, by constant interaction with the Commission, will succeed in promoting their common ends and winning the confidence and recognition of intellectual workers all over the world. All right, that was nice. That was nice. The question of disarmament. The greatest obstacle to the success of the disarmament plan was the fact that people in general left out of account the chief difficulties of the problem. Most objects are gained by gradual steps. For example, the supersession of absolute monarchy by democracy. Here, however, we are concerned with an objective which cannot be reached step by step. As long as the possibility of war remains, nations will insist on being as perfectly prepared militarily as they can in order to emerge triumphant from the next war. It will also be impossible to avoid educating the youth in warlike traditions and cultivating narrow national vanity joined to the glorification of the warlike spirit. As long as people have to be prepared for occasions when such a spirit will be needed in the citizens for the purpose of war. To arm is to give one's voice and make one's preparations not for peace but for war. Therefore, people will not disarm step by step. They will disarm at one blow or not at all. The accomplishment of such a far-reaching change in the life of nations presupposes a mighty moral effort, a deliberate departure from deeply ingrained tradition. Anyone who is not prepared to make the fate of his country in case of a dispute depend entirely on the decisions of an international court of arbitration, and to enter into a treaty to this effect without reserve, is not really resolved to avoid war. It is a case of all or nothing. It is undeniable that previous attempts to ensure peace have failed through aiming at inadequate compromises. Disarmament and security are only to be had in combination. The one guarantee of security is an undertaking by all nations to give effect to the decisions of the international authority. We stand, therefore, at the parting of the ways. Whether we find the way of peace or continue along the old road of brute force, so unworthy of our civilization, depends on ourselves. On the one side, the freedom of the individual and the security of society beckon to us. On the other, slavery for the individual and the annihilation of our civilization threaten us. Our fate will be according to our deserts. The disarmament of 1932. May I begin with an article of political faith? It runs as follows. The state is made for man, not man for the state. And in this respect, science resembles the state. These are old sayings coined by men for whom human personality was the highest human good. I should shrink from repeating them, were it not that they are forever threatening to fall into oblivion, particularly in these days of organization and mechanization. I regard it as the chief duty of the state to protect the individual and give him the opportunity to develop into a creative personality. That is to say, the state should be our servant and not we its slaves. The state transgresses the commandment when it compels us by force to engage in military and war service. The more so since the object and the effect of this slavish service is to kill people belonging to other countries or interfere with their freedom of development. We are only to make such sacrifices to the state as will promote the free development of individual human beings. To any American, all this may be a platitude, but not to any European. Hence, we may hope that the fight against war will find strong support among Americans. And now for the disarmament conference. Ought one to laugh, weep, or hope when one thinks of it? Imagine a city inhabited by fiery-tempered, dishonest, and quarrelsome citizens. The constant danger to life there is felt as a serious handicap which makes all healthy development impossible. The magistrate desires to remedy this abominable state of affairs, although all his counselors and the rest of the citizens insist on continuing to carry a dagger in their girdles. After years of preparation, the magistrate determines to compromise and raises the question how long and how sharp the dagger is allowed to be, which anyone may carry in his belt when he goes out. As long as the cunning citizens do not suppress knifing by legislation, the courts, and the police, things go on in the old way, of course. A definition of the length and sharpness of the permitted dagger will help only the strongest and most turbulent, and leave the weaker at their mercy. You will all understand the meaning of this parable. It is true that we have a League of Nations and a Court of Arbitration, but the League is not much more than a meeting hall, and the Court has no means of enforcing its decisions. These institutions provide no security for any country in case of an attack on it. If you bear this in mind, you will judge the attitude of the French, their refusal to disarm without security, less harshly than it is usually judged at present. Unless we can agree to limit the sovereignty of the individual state by all binding ourselves to take joint action against any country which openly or secretly resists a judgment of the Court of Arbitration, we shall never get out of a state of universal anarchy and terror. No sleight of hand can reconcile the unlimited sovereignty of the individual country with security against attack. Will it need new disasters to induce the countries to undertake to enforce every decision of the recognized international court? The progress of events so far scarcely justifies us in hoping for anything better in the near future. but everyone who cares for civilization and justice must exert all his strength to conceive his fellows of the necessity for laying all countries under an international obligation of this kind. It will be urged against this notion, not without a certain justification, that it overestimates the efficacy of machinery and neglects the psychological, or rather the moral, factor. Spiritual disarmament, people insist, must precede material disarmament. They say further, and truly, that the greatest obstacle to international order is that monstrously exaggerated spirit of nationalism, which also goes by the fair sounding but misused name of patriotism. During the last century and a half, this idol has acquired an uncanny and exceedingly pernicious power everywhere. To estimate this objection at its proper worth, one must realize that a reciprocal relation exists between external machinery and internal states of mind. Not only does the machinery depend on traditional modes of feeling and owe its origin and its survival to them, but the existing machinery in its turn exercises a powerful influence on national modes of feeling. The present deplorably high development of nationalism everywhere, in my opinion, intimately connected with the institution of compulsory military service, or to call it by its less offensive name, national armies. A country which demands military service of its inhabitants is compelled to cultivate a nationalistic spirit in them, which provides the psychological foundation of military efficiency. Along with this religion, it has to hold up its instrument, brute force, to the admiration of the youth in its schools. The introduction of compulsory service is therefore, to my mind, the prime cause of the moral collapse of the white race, which seriously threatens not merely the survival of our civilization, but our very existence. This curse, along with great social blessings, started with the French Revolution, and before long dragged all the other nations in its train. Therefore, those who desired to encourage the growth of an international spirit and to combat chauvinism must take their stand against compulsory service. Is the severe persecution to which conscientious objectors to military service are subjected today a whit less disgraceful to the commentary than those to which the martyrs of religion were exposed in former centuries? Can you, as the Kellogg Pact does, condemn war and at the same time leave the individual to die? Ah, can you, as the Kellogg Pact does, condemn war and at the same time leave the individual to the tender mercies of the war machine in each country? If in the if in view of the disarmament conference, we are not to restrict ourselves to the technical problems of organization involved, but also to tackle the psychological question more directly from educational motives. We must try on international lines to invent some legal way by which the individual can refuse to serve in the army. Such a regulation would undoubtedly produce a great moral effect. This is my position in a nutshell. Mere agreements to limit armaments furnish no sort of security. Compulsory arbitration must be supported by an executive force guaranteed by all the participating countries, which is ready to proceed against the disturber of the peace with economic and military sanctions. Compulsory service as the bulwark of unhealthy nationalism must be combated. Most important of all, conscientious objectors must be protected on the international basis. Finally, I would draw your attention to a book, War Again Tomorrow, by Ludwig Bauer, which discusses the issues here involved in an acute and unprejudiced manner and with great psychological insight. We got a little bit more, but why? benefits that the inventive genius of man has conferred on us in the last 100 years could make life happy and carefree if organization had been able to keep pace with technical progress. As it is, these hard-won achievements in the hands of our generation are like a razor in the hands of a child of 3. The possession of marvelous means of production has brought care and hunger instead of freedom. The results of technical progress are most baleful where they furnish means for the destruction of human life and the hard-won fruits of toil, as we of the older generation experienced to our horror in the Great War. More dreadful even than destruction, in my opinion, is the humiliating slavery into which war plunges the individual. It is not a terrible thing to be forced by the community. Is it not a terrible thing to be forced by the community to do things which every individual regards as abominable crimes? Only a few had the moral greatness to resist. Them I regard as the real heroes of the Great War. There is one ray of hope. I believe that the responsible leaders of the nations do, in the main, honestly desire to abolish war. The resistance to this essential step forward comes from those unfortunate national traditions which are handed on like a hereditary disease from generation to generation through the workings of the educational system. The principal vehicle of this tradition is military training and its glorification, and equally that portion of the press which is controlled by heavy industry and the soldiers. Without disarmament, there can be no lasting peace. Conversely, the continuation of military preparations on the present scale will inevitably lead to new catastrophes. New catastrophes. That is why the Disarmament Conference of 1932 will decide the fate of this generation and the next. When one thinks how pitiable, taken as a whole, have been the results of former conferences, it becomes clear that it is the duty of all intelligent and responsible people to exert their full powers to remind public opinion again and again of the importance of the 1932 conference. Only if the statesmen have behind them the will to peace of a decisive majority in their own countries can they attain their great end. And for the formation of this public opinion, each one of us is responsible in every word and deed. The doom of the conference would be sealed if the delegates came to it with ready-made instructions, the carrying out of which would soon become a matter of prestige. This seems to be generally realized, for meetings between the statesmen of 2 nations at a time, which have become very frequent of late, have been used to prepare the ground for the conference by conversations about the disarmament problem. This seems to me a very happy device, for 2 men or groups of men can usually discuss things together most reasonably, honestly, and dispassionately when there is no third person present in front of whom they think they must be careful what they say. Only if exhaustive preparations of this kind are made for the conference, if surprises are thereby ruled out, and an atmosphere of confidence is created by genuine goodwill, can we hope for a happy issue. In these great matters, success is not a matter of cleverness, still less of cunning, but of honesty and confidence. The moral element cannot be displaced by reason. Thank heaven. It is not the individual spectator's duty merely to wait and criticize. He must serve the cause by all means in his power. The fate of the world will be such as the world deserves. Active pacifism. I consider myself lucky in witnessing the great peace demonstration organized by the Flemish people. To all concerned in it, I feel impelled to call out in the name of men of goodwill with a care for the future. In this hour of opened eyes and awakening conscience, we feel ourselves united with you by the deepest ties. We must not conceal from ourselves that an improvement in the present depressing situation is impossible without a severe struggle. For the handful of those who are really determined to do something is minute in comparison with the mass of the lukewarm and the misguided. And those who have an interest in keeping the machinery of war going are a very powerful body. They will stop at nothing to make public opinion subservient to their murderous ends. It looks as if the ruling statesmen of today were really trying to secure permanent peace. But the ceaseless piling up of armaments shows only too clearly that they are unequal to coping with the hostile forces, unequal to coping with the hostile forces which are preparing for war. In my opinion, deliverance can only come from the people themselves. If they wish to avoid the degrading slavery of war service, they must declare with no uncertain voice for complete disarmament. As long as armies exist, any serious quarrel will lead to war. A pacifism which does not actually try to prevent the nations from arming is and must remain impotent. May the conscience and the common sense of the peoples be awakened, so that we may reach a new stage in the life of nations, where people will look back on war as an incomprehensible aberration of their forefathers. Letter to a Friend of Peace. It has come to my ears that in your great-heartedness you are quietly accomplishing a splendid work. Impelled by solicitude for humanity and its fate, small is the number of them that see with their own eyes and feel with their own hearts. But it is their strength that will decide whether the human race must relapse into hopeless condition without a blind multitude appears which a blind multitude appears today to regard as the ideal. Oh, that the nations might see, before it is too late, how much of their self-determination they have got to sacrifice in order to avoid the struggle of all against all. The power of conscience and this international spirit has proved itself inadequate. At present, it is being so weak as to tolerate parleying with the worst enemies of civilization. There is a kind of consolation which is a crime against humanity, and it passes for political wisdom. We cannot despair of humanity, since we are ourselves human beings, and it is a comfort that there still exist individuals like yourself, who one knows to be alive and undismayed. Another ditto. Dear friend and spiritual brother, to be quite frank, a declaration like the one before me in a country which submits to conscription in peacetime seems to be valueless. What you must fight for is liberation from universal military service. Verily, the French nation has had to pay heavily for the victory of 1918, for that victory has been largely responsible for holding it down in the most degrading of all forms of slavery. Let your efforts in this struggle be unceasing. You have a mighty ally in the German reactionaries and militarists. If France clings to universal military service, it will be impossible in the long run to prevent its introduction into Germany. For the demand of the Germans for equal rights will succeed in the end, and then there will be 2 German military slaves to every French one, which would certainly not be in the interests of France. Only if we succeed in abolishing compulsory service altogether will it be possible to educate the youth in the spirit of reconciliation, joy in life, and love towards all living creatures. I believe that a refusal on conscientious grounds to serve in the army when called up, if carried out by 50,000 men at the same moment, would be irresistible. The individual can accomplish little here, nor can one wish to see the best among us devoted to destruction through the machinery behind which stand the 3 great powers of stupidity, fear, and greed. Third ditto. Dear Sir, the point with which you deal in your letter is one of prime importance. The armament industry is, as you say, one of the greatest dangers that beset mankind. It is the hidden evil power behind the nationalism which is rampant everywhere. Possibly something might be gained by nationalization, but it is extremely hard to determine exactly what industries should be included. Should the aircraft industry? And how much of the metal industry? And the chemical industry? As regards the munitions industry and the export of war material, the League of Nations has busied itself for years with efforts to get this horrible traffic controlled, with what little success we all know. Last year, I asked a well-known American diplomat why Japan was not forced by a commercial boycott to desist from her policy of force. Our commercial interests are too strong, was the answer. How can one help people who rest satisfied with a statement like that? You believe that a word from me would suffice to get something done in this sphere? What an illusion. People flatter me as long as I do not get in their way. But if I direct my efforts towards objects which do not suit them, they immediately turn to abuse and calumny in defense of their interests, and the onlookers mostly keep out of the light. The cowards. Have you ever tested the civil courage of your countrymen? The silently accepted motto is leave it alone and don't speak of it. You may be sure that I shall do everything in my power along the lines you indicate, but nothing can be achieved as directly as you think. Finish it off with this here. Women in war. In my opinion, the patriotic women ought to be sent to the front in the next war instead of the men. It would at least be a novelty in this dreary sphere of infinite confusion. And besides, why should not such heroic feelings on the part of the fair sex find a more picturesque outlet than in attacks on a defenseless civilian? Thoughts on the world economic crisis. If there is one thing that can give a layman in the sphere of economics the courage to express an opinion on the nature of the alarming economic difficulties of the present day, it is the hopeless confusion of opinions among the experts. What I have to say is nothing new and does not pretend to be anything more than the opinion of an independent and honest man who, unburdened by class or national prejudices, desires nothing but the good of humanity in the most harmonious possible scheme of human existence. If in what follows I write as if I were clear about certain things and sure of the truth of what I am saying, this is done merely for the sake of an easier mode of expression. It does not proceed from unwarranted self-confidence or a belief in the infallibility of my somewhat simple intellectual conception of problems which are in reality uncommonly complex. As I see it, this crisis differs in character from past crises in that it is based on an entirely new set of conditions. Due to rapid progress in methods of production, only a fraction of the available human labor in the world is needed for the production of the total amount of consumption goods necessary to life. Under a completely free economic system, this fact is bound to lead to unemployment. For reasons which I do not propose to analyze here, the majority of people are compelled to work for the minimum wage on which life can be supported. If two factories produce the same sort of goods, other things being equal, that one will be able to produce them more cheaply, which it employs less workmen, i.e., makes the individual worker work as long and as hard as human nature permits. From this it follows inevitably that with methods of production what they are today, only a portion of the available labor can be used. With unreasonable demands, While unreasonable demands are made on this portion, the remainder is automatically excluded from the process of production. This leads to a fall in sales and profits. Businesses go smash, which further increases unemployment and diminishes confidence in industrial concern and therewith public participation in these mediating banks. Finally, the banks become insolvent through the sudden withdrawal of deposits, and the wheels of industry therewith come to a complete standstill. The crisis has also been attributed to other causes which we will now consider. 1. Overproduction. We have to distinguish between two things here: real overproduction and apparent overproduction. By real overproduction, I mean a production so great that it exceeds the demand. This may perhaps apply to motor cars and wheat in the United States at the present moment, although even that it is doubtful. By overproduction, people usually mean a condition of things in which more of one particular article is produced than can in existing circumstances be sold in spite of a shortage of consumption goods among consumers. This condition of things I call apparent overproduction. In this case, it is not the demand that is lacking, but the consumer's purchasing power. Such apparent overproduction is only another word for a crisis, and therefore cannot serve as an explanation of the latter. Hence, people who try to make overproduction responsible for the crisis are merely juggling with words. 2. Reparations. The obligations to pay reparations lies heavy on the debtor nations and their industries, compels them to go in for dumping, and so harms the creditor nations too. This is beyond dispute. But the appearance of the crisis in the United States, in spite of the high tariff wall protecting them, proves that this cannot be the principal cause of the world crisis. The shortage of gold in the debtor countries due to reparations can at most serve as an argument for putting an end to those payments. It cannot be dragged in as an explanation of the world crisis. 3. Erection of new tariff walls, increase in the unproductive burden of armaments, political insecurity owing to latent danger of war. All these things add considerably to the troubles of Europe, but do not materially affect America. The appearance of the crisis in America shows that they cannot be its principal causes. 4. the dropping out of the two powers, China and Russia. This blow to world trade also does not touch America very nearly, and therefore cannot be a principal cause of the crisis. The economic rise of the lower classes since the war. This, supposing it to be a reality, could only produce a scarcity of goods, not an excessive supply. I will not weary the reader by enumerating further contentions which do not seem to me to get to the heart of the matter. Of one thing I feel certain: the same technical progress which in itself might relieve mankind of a great part of the labor necessary to its subsistence is the main cause of our present troubles. Hence there are those who would in all seriousness forbid the introduction of technical improvements. This is obviously absurd. But how can we find a more rational way out of our dilemma? If we could somehow manage to prevent the purchasing power of the masses, measured in terms of goods, from sinking below a certain minimum, stoppages in the industrial cycle such as we are experiencing today would be rendered impossible. The logically simplest but almost daring method of achieving this is a completely planned economy, in which consumption goods are produced and distributed by the community. That in essentials is what is being attempted in Russia today. Much will depend on what results this mighty experiment produces. To hazard a prophecy here would be presumption. Can goods be produced as economically under such a system as under one which leaves more freedom to individual enterprise? Can the system maintain itself at all without the terror that has so far accompanied it, which none of us Westerners would care to let himself in for? Does not such a rigid centralized system tend towards protection and hostility to advantageous innovations? We must take care, however, not to allow these suspicions to become prejudices which prevent us from forming an objective judgment. My personal opinion is that those methods are preferable which respect existing traditions and habits so far as that is in any way compatible with the end in view. Nor do I believe that a sudden transference of the control of industry to the hands of the public would be beneficial from the point of view of production. Private enterprise should be left its sphere of activity, and so far as it has not already been eliminated by the industry itself in the form of cartelization. There are, however, two respects in which this economic freedom ought to be limited. In each branch of industry, the number of working hours per week ought to be reduced by law. That unemployment is systematically abolished. At the same time, minimum wages must be fixed in such a way that the purchasing power of the workers keeps pace with production. Further, in those industries which have become monopolistic in character through organization on the part of the producers, prices must be controlled by the state in order to keep the creation of new capital within reasonable bounds and prevent the artificial strangling of production and consumptions. In this way, it might perhaps be possible to establish a proper balance between production and consumption without too great a limitation of free enterprise, and at the same time to stop the intolerable tyranny of the owners of the means of production, land, or machinery, over the wage earners in the widest sense of the term. This is the last one. Culture and prosperity. If one would estimate the damage done by the great political catastrophe to the development of human civilization, one must remember that culture in its highest forms is a delicate plant which depends on a complicated set of conditions, and is wont to flourish only in a few places at any given time. For it to blossom, there is needed, first of all, a certain degree of prosperity, which enables a fraction of the population to work at things not directly necessary to the maintenance of life. Secondly, a moral tradition of respect for cultural values and achievements, in virtue of which this class is provided with the means of living by the other classes, those who provide the immediate necessities of life. During the past century, Germany has been one of the countries in which both conditions were fulfilled. The prosperity was, taken as a whole, modest but sufficient, the tradition of respect for cultural vigorous. On this basis, the German nation has brought forth fruits of culture which form an integral part of the development of the modern world. The tradition in the main still stands, the prosperity is gone. The industries of this country have been cut off almost completely from the sources of raw materials on which the existence of the industrial part of the populations were based. The surplus necessary to support the intellectual worker has suddenly ceased to exist. With it, the tradition which depends on it will inevitably collapse also, and a fruitful nursery of culture turn to wilderness. The human race, in so far as it sets a value on culture, has an interest in preventing such impoverishment. It will give what help it can in the immediate crisis and reawaken that higher community of feeling now thrust into the background by national egotism, for which human values have a validity independent of politics and frontiers. It will then procure for every nation conditions of work under which it can exist and under which it can bring forth fruits of culture. The heirs of the ages. Previous generations were able to look upon intellectual and cultural progress as simply the inherited fruits of their forebears' labors, which made life easier and more beautiful for them. But the calamities of our times show us that this was a fatal illusion. We see now that the greatest efforts are needed if this legacy of humanities is to prove a blessing and not a curse. For whereas formerly it was enough for a man to have freed himself to some extent from personal egotism to make him a valuable member of society, today he must also be required to overcome national and class egotism. Only if he reaches those heights can he contribute towards improving the lot of humanity. As regards this most important need of the age, the inhabitants of a small state are better placed than those of a great power, since the latter are exposed, both in politics and economics, to the temptation to gain their ends by brute force. The agreement between Holland and Belgium, which is the only bright spot in European affairs during the last few years, encourages one to hope that the small nations will play a leading part in the attempt to liberate the world from the degrading yoke of militarism through the renunciation of the individual country's unlimited right of self-determination. That was really nice reading from that book. That was really nice. That was really nice. Man. Alright, we'll go back to some philosophy for the next one. Man, the world as I see it.